which is to say, it felt as if I was moving very quickly from somewhere, in my body, and my body
Oh,
wake up in the middle of the night with like somebody
so
standing. I was kind of pulled out, but here it was just completely like, my God, this if I had religious language, I might have said, my God, this is the kingdom of heaven.
Hi everyone, welcome to Life is Healing. I'm Labaina, your host. I am a healing practitioner and I specialize in energy bodywork, shamanism, and astrology. Life is Healing is a podcast where I share my passion for healing. In the last 15 years, my journey has encompassed plant medicine, energy healing, astrology, and shamanism, which are all topics you will hear about. I'll share tips from various modalities and interviews of healing practitioners and stories from all over the world, and a fun astro update in every episode. Tune in and join me for this journey on Life is Healing. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Life is Healing with Labaina. Today, we're going to get the episode started with an astrological update because March is an action packed month from an astrological point of view. So, what's happening in March? Venus went retrograde in the beginning of the month following a new moon in Pisces at the end of February. So, from March 1st to March 27th, Venus is going to stay retrograde, and we'll talk more about what that means. And in the middle of this retrograde, Mercury is going to join the retrograde panel and go retrograde on March 14th. So Mercury retrograde starts March 14th, which means we're already deep in the pre-shadow period of the retrograde of this trickster planet that we all love. Joke, joke. Okay, so we have Venus retrograde from March 1st to the 27th. Then we have Mercury retrograding starting on March 14th, which coincides with the total lunar eclipse that's going to be happening in the sign of Virgo on March 14th as well, at least in the Eastern time zones. So, because of the timing of this eclipse, some people will experience this eclipse on March 13th. But us in the Eastern time zone, we're going to experience it on March 14th. So, along with that, on this eclipse, we have a touch of Saturn, but we'll dig into that a little bit later. Let's first talk about Venus retrograde. So, Venus retrograde has one of my most favorite mythologies associated with it. And the most popular mythology that's associated with Venus retrograde is one of the Mesopotamian goddess Inanna. So the myth goes that Venus retrograde is the journey of the goddess Inanna through the underworld. Inanna, also known as Ishtar, is the goddess of love, fertility, and believe it or not, war. I know Venus is not often associated with war, but in the mythology of Inanna and in the mythology of Venus retrograde, she is. And we'll see more about why that is. But her title really is called Queen of Heaven. So when we begin the mythology, Venus is considered the evening star, right? And then she descends into the underworld and basically disappears from the skies, right? And that part is associated with when Inanna decides to go into the underworld to visit her sister, Ereshkigal. I hope I'm saying all these names right, who is the queen of the underworld. So, in order to get to her sister, she has to move through the 7 gates of the underworld. And each time she moves through a gate, she takes off a part of herself. She sheds a part of herself. Each piece of clothing, starting with her crown, her jewelry, and everything gets stripped off each time she goes through one of the gates of the underworld. This represents that it's a stripping away of layers of her identity and power because now she's not in her domain, she's in her sister's domain. When she finally reaches her sister, Ereshkigal kills her with her look, and she dies in the underworld. So, this part of the mythology is considered to be associated with when Venus is conjunct the sun and a new cycle of Venus is about to start. So, the message in this part of the mythology is that a part of us must die in order to be born new. Now, going back to the myth, there are those in the underworld, there are those in the world above who want Inanna back. And in order for her to be brought back, a sacrifice has to be made. So they go and they plead to all the judges of the underworld, and they go and plead to her sister, to Inanna's sister, saying, "Hey, Erishkigal, we want her back. What can we do to get her back?" And ultimately, what's decided is that Inanna's husband, Dumuzi, has to be sacrificed. But there's a deal that's made that Dumuzi will stay in the underworld for part of the year and spend the other part of the year in the world above. And this results in the creation of the seasons on Earth, right? Meanwhile, after all these going through all this journey and going through all these gates and confronting death and dying and then being brought back to life, Inanna returns to the world transformed. She has faced death. She has looked at and embraced her shadow, and she has emerged renewed. Now she has been born again. And this is the phase when Venus appears again in the sky, this time as a morning star. So, this story mirrors the essence of the Venus retrograde. The planet disappears from view, aligns with the sun, marking a moment of death and transformation, and then rises again as the morning star, reborn, renewed, and ready for a fresh beginning. At the same time, she has been touched by death. So she has been changed forever. Each Venus retrograde asks us to descend into our own underworld. It's a time of deep introspection and letting go of what no longer belongs to us, all the identities, all the layers that we have that comes up during the Venus retrograde period is asking to be sacrificed. Now, when Venus is retrograde in Aries, which is the first sign of the zodiac and is also a warrior archetype, this journey becomes more than just a reflective pause. It becomes a powerful reclamation of our truest selves. It's the journey of the soul. It's the heroine's journey because Venus is a feminine archetype. It's about confronting our shadows, being open to radical transformation, which involves sacrifice. Now, Venus retrograde will most certainly affect our relationships because Venus is the planet of relationships. We might be confronted with having to look at our toxic patterns in relationships. We might be forced to look at relationships that are no longer working for us and be willing to let them go, or at least be willing to let them transform. So, this is the part of the sacrifice that's involved. And as we do so, it might be painful. We might, especially because retrogrades allow us to look at parts of ourselves that stay hidden most of the time. And then as Mercury joins in, it's going to create quite a bit of chaos, at least from my perspective, because both these planets are going retrograde in the sign of Aries. And Aries is fiery, Aries is a warrior archetype. Aries also rules the relationship axis because it rules the first house in astrology and is opposite to the seventh house in astrology, self and others. So these are the energies that we're dealing with when we walk into a Venus retrograde, which is also going to be joined by a Mercury retrograde. Things are going to get slowed down, and at the same time, they're going to get chaotic. And we might have breakdown in communications. Be we might find ourselves in situations with our loved ones, in our intimate relationships with those we love. They might be the very places where we confront our shadows. Now, to add to the whole mix of all of this, we have a total lunar eclipse happening in the sign of Virgo on the same day that Mercury is going retrograde, at least in the Eastern time zone. And this total lunar eclipse, it illuminates the full moon and the south node in Virgo. And it also illuminates the sun and north node in Pisces because the lunar nodes are in the same sign as this eclipse, or the sun and moon during this eclipse, rather. So, what are the lunar nodes? The lunar nodes are where the moon intersects the sun's ecliptic, and what they reveal from an astrological archetypal place is the soul's path of evolution. So, this particular lunar eclipse might bring up to the surface cycles that started for us back in September of 2024, September 18th, when there was a lunar eclipse in the sign of Pisces in the same axis. And as I mentioned very briefly, this particular lunar eclipse is happening under Saturn's watchful eye, meaning what? Meaning that Saturn is conjunct this lunar eclipse. It's conjunct the sun. And there are a bunch of planets happening in the sign of Pisces, including Saturn. So now, as Saturn is influencing this lunar eclipse, it makes it even more of a karmic energy. So we're already dealing with the retrograde, we're dealing with the shadow stuff, we're dealing with things coming up to be seen that we haven't seen before. And now we have Saturn looking at this lunar eclipse, which is conjunct the lunar nodes. And we're like, wow, what's happening here? So, what we can say is that we are being asked, there is on a soul level, we're being asked to look at everything that we've been hiding in the shadows. So, Virgo is a very critical sign, it's a very analytical sign, right? And because the South Node is in Virgo, it represents patterns that we should be letting go of. So rather than trying to analyze, trying to control, trying to be a perfectionist in our relationships, in our communications, or even in other matters that are brought up to the surface under this eclipse, we need to learn to be the North Node in Pisces, which is surrender, which is let go. Like Inanna, be willing to get stripped of all identity and to dissolve and transcend to the energy of our soul. So I think Saturn definitely pushes us even more in this direction. So the cherry on top is following this powerful lunar eclipse, we have the spring equinox on March 20th. And the spring equinox is 0 degree Aries. So now we have even more Aries energy coming in. Aries is new beginnings, Aries is warrior archetype, as we said. But Aries is also taking action, moving forward, and being courageous and brave enough. And at the same time, Aries also has this innocence to it because it's the first sign of the zodiac. So you have this lunar eclipse energy in Virgo and Pisces. Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac, right? And we're kind of moving through all of that and we're starting anew, or at least there's a part of us that wants to start anew. And in order to do all of that, what we need to do is let go of those identities, let go of those relationships, let go of those toxic patterns that are keeping us in a bind. So that's another influence of Saturn, right? It's keeping us in a bind. We might find during this time that patterns emerge for us that we haven't seen for a while. That's also part of the cleansing process. So, one of my teachers used to say that whenever we are finishing up a pattern that has been keeping us in a bind, let's say, we get confronted with that pattern. And in order to let go of that pattern completely, we need to be confronted with it in a very deep way. And it might want to take over again. Even our body might resist, and we feel things in a much more visceral way than we used to, because maybe a part of us thought those patterns have been done and over with. But now, under this pressure cooker that March is creating for us, we might be confronted with these very old patterns of being, and they are more than likely to show up in relationships, because that's the theme. That's the theme of March, really, because we got the Venus thing going, and also the Pisces lunar eclipse. I mean, the Virgo lunar eclipse with the Sun in Pisces. That energy, lunar eclipses are also about relationships, right? So that might be where we have the opportunity to really dig through those old patterns that we thought were done and over with, and now they emerge and we're like, wow, they have a life of their own. So that's our opportunity to really truly be able to let go of those compulsive ways that we function and be done with it and finish the cycle to start anew, just like the spring season that's coming. So that concludes our astrological update portion of this episode. And for the next portion, I have with me a wonderful guest. His name, much like the other name of Inanna, is actually Ishtar. His name is Ishtar Howell, and we will be talking about many different topics. We're just going to get right into it, and join us for that segment as well. All right. Welcome to the show, Ishtar. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I called it a show,
Oh,
but it's really a podcast.
thank you.
Yeah, not
Yeah.
common.
God no. Thank you very much, Lubina. I'll try not to make my words sound as still as little stilted as possible. So
Okay.
yeah.
So, sounds good. Yeah, so I am just very excited to talk to you today, and like I was talking to you before we hit the record button. One of the reasons that I wanted to interview is because you have a very unique story, and it involves NDE, it involves monkhood, it involves awakening and astrology and a lot of crazy psychic experiences. So it's a really fascinating life that you've had so far.
It has been an adventure, and I'm always happy to talk about it. It's funny as you say that though, because I just got in 20 feet over there is the vegetable garden outside the house, and so I'm kind of going from planting cabbages and hands wonderfully filthy, and now we get to delve into the stuff that's often seen as a very very different sort of thing, and yet in my life it's often not
Oh,
the
can you say
planting
more about
cabbages.
that?
Yeah, well, it's uh, for instance, today when planting the cabbages, cabbage starts, mind you, so look like about that big. When putting them in the ground, there was just a complete sense that they were singing.
Hmm.
And this can sound very, very, kind of woo woo, but it's almost like it's just a complete like sense of love coming from the cabbages, piercing my heart. That's one aspect of it. Then there's another flavor that comes in when, out in the garden, walking around in the property. There's such a beautiful sense of being in all the trees at the same time, and in this body, and in the
Hmm.
grass, and
Hmm.
and in the boulders that are punctuating the field here and there. And then going and getting in the car and going to the farm store, down the dirt road for some people interaction, and the same thing persists. A sense of being in my own body, my own consciousness, but my own consciousness is, in a certain sense, everybody's consciousness, and sort of like a feeling of being, in a bigger seamless body, which is of course very different than how myself and most of us tend to experience most of our lives. We tend to have a very sort of atomized experience in some way, shape, or form. We kind of get the
Like a
sense of
narrow way of operating from like here, right?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I really liked I heard you talk about what happened prior to your NDE. You still had a lot of experiences prior to your NDE that were very psychic in nature, but there was
yeah.
also just when you were talking about your childhood, I've heard other people describe this when they wake up. They're like, "Oh, I had this before all like the
Yeah.
separate self was the sort of was sort of like the contraction that happened that was unusual, not the waking up wasn't an event, the event was the separate self, so when I heard you describe your experiences as or just the way you were as a child, and then the thing that you talked about was the personality, and
Mm,
I kind of want you to just, if you could talk a little bit about that, like what was it like before your NDE, because you had an NDE when you were 13 years old. So
yeah.
that's
Right.
also like so young, and
Yes.
then after that was a whole different life.
I have to tell you. Yeah, well, maybe we'll start. I'll pick up where you left off, and the word personality, and that's sort of a kind of a funny story or one off, really. I think what was it? I was in kindergarten, 6 years old. I think that I was six. I was at my first parent teacher conference. Incredible that we had these in kindergarten, but whatever. And I was sitting there in the little chair, and there's my kindergarten teacher, and here's my mom, and I'm kind of like a lot of kids, and I didn't know it at the time, but I'm in this kind of very non-local, fuzzy and interesting sort of way, kind of mode of consciousness. I remember, and they're talking, and then they start talking about me, but I'm still really not interested in following the conversation. I'm just sort of waiting to basically go to the bakery and get a butter cookie. And then the teacher tells my mother, "Oh, he's got a great personality." Somehow that word perked my ear up. I don't know why, but one of the reasons probably was I had no idea what that word meant. And so right after the conference, I'm walking with my mom, and I ask her, personality. What's a personality?
Mm.
What does she mean by that? And then my mom, kind of gave me a description, and then somehow when she told me that, a light bulb um, just went off in my mind. And the light bulb was the answer to a question that I was only half conscious that I had been asking up to that point. And that question that I'd been trying to figure out was, why do the adults around me speak and behave in a different way than what I feel inside them?
Right.
I noticed a disjoint, a strong dissonance in nearly everybody. And and then when she said, personality, now I'd say I'd be a little bit more technical and might not say that's personality, but anyways, at the time, I was like, that's it, and I thought, and somehow I also thought I got to get me one of those, because then I can be like, I wasn't conformist really. I don't know why I was having such conformist thoughts, but I was thinking, then I could be like everybody else, and
Right.
because I really, in my mind, when she told me her definition, I visualized some kind of system of ons and offs that you inputs of experience go into and outputs of something else come out, and there's a translation system. So then for a while in the morning, every morning after that, I was the baby of the family, so I was quite babied. So, my mother would, put my turtlenecks on for me, at 5 or 6 still, stuff like that. And so when we would do that ritual of, picking my clothes out, I would then say like, well, today, because of this experience, now I dislike or I fear these things. Whereas yesterday, I was basically making a character up each day
Ah,
to play,
okay.
because I figured that's what people are doing is
You're
they're
just being an
you kind of
actor.
yeah, everybody's acting, everybody's having a game of it. I did that every day, and at some point, one of them, and I don't think it was maybe necessarily one that I made up myself. I think we do have natural natural propensities to sort of
Sure.
seize up and concretize in a way at around age 7. At one point, one of them seized up, and then I was actually a bit down on myself. I was like, oh, why did I do that? Because as you know, it wasn't long into first grade that I was miserable, and the next year, absolutely miserable with this this self consciousness that had come in. It completely a completely different, a shock to the system, really, and that that eventually with an NDE made a spiritual seeker out of me. That suffering. Uh, but anyways, you'd also mentioned psychical stuff. That was that was definitely a part of childhood. Before that, personality cloak kind of went on, and after
Yeah.
the personality cloak kind of went on, I think it diminished, started to kind of get, to me, thankfully, uh, would sort of the activity went down at about age like 10, I'd
What was
say.
the activity before that?
Oh, mainly ghosts. I mean, that was the one that I was like, kind of had an ambivalent attitude towards, and even I was skeptical. I was like, well, just might have an overactive imagination. There's some quirk in my brain, whatever, and I
Virgo
actually,
moon,
yeah, I've been happy with, yeah,
logic.
Yellow Room, yeah, I would have been happy with all of those because, like, actually having
Yeah.
discarnate, like dead people with like weird faces because their faces are contorted in the to the pains of the life that they lead. That wasn't necessarily my preferred experience as a 7, 8 year old to sort of wake up in the middle of the night with like somebody standing
Okay.
in
So
my
did they
doorway.
try to communicate with you
Oh
when they
God,
were
yes, yeah, oh God,
okay.
yeah, God, Jesus, yeah.
What were they trying to like, what was their main thing? The reason I'm asking is because, I have similar experiences. I don't actually remember so much in childhood having those experiences, as I do more when I was a teenager and onwards. But I'm very curious about, like, as a child when you had these experiences, what was the communication that they tried to get in? I just wanna hear about that.
Okay, well, with the ones who were serious about, I don't know, moving on or getting help, those
Okay.
were always easier and preferable, communications for me. And it was usually something like, "I'm scared. I'm confused. Can you help me?"
Okay.
And it was usually, and that I preferred, because if that was what someone was coming with to me, you
Yeah.
know, we could deal. Um, I didn't always get out why the hell they were coming to a kid,
Right.
but eventually
Right.
I kind of figured out what was going on. Some of them would tell me, as they were, leaving. But those were easy to deal with, even if they were a little bit scary. Sometimes they were a little bit scary in their appearance and stuff I felt off of them.
Yeah.
You know, and some of them even told me that they'd done some bad stuff,
Okay.
in their life.
It's like a
That
confessional.
a bit like a confessional.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was, and then I would, like, I don't know. I was not being arrogant about this. I would kind of just, it was a defense mechanism for me to basically improvise and allow what I needed to express, to come out. So sometimes I would tell them, I forgive you. You got to go. And I usually, what I would do is, I would close my eyes and I would breathe in a certain way, and I would find myself kind of going back into this big brightness, this sort of vast. Really, I was going into samadhi in a sense, and I just didn't have the word for that. Didn't know what I was doing. But I would go into that, and then somehow would have something come forward into the space between us, and I would almost like feel a lightning in the atmosphere of the room that would signal to me that they'd successfully transitioned. And so this just went on. I was a big fan of the Jeremy Brett version of Sherlock Holmes in the 80s. and early
Yeah.
90s. I
Yeah.
absolutely love that
Mm.
rendition, and so it's like a hero, one of my heroes. Even had a
Mhm.
Sherlock Holmes deerstalker cap that was my mother's. I don't know how it fit a child's head. She bought it as a student in the late 60s or early 70s, and I would wear this full costume, but I would wear the hat and I would sit in this little rocking chair that was in my room, and then I would have them sit in the space across from me, and I was basically have a little pipe in my mouth, and I'd turn the interactions into like a Sherlock Holmes interaction. Like they bring me
Like
a
a
problem, I solve it. You know,
like a game. You were
I had
almost.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Either that
Well,
or I'd get my Ghostbusters pack on when I was getting aggressive, because I could get
yeah,
aggressive sometimes too. There
sure.
were some that I think were native to my house that didn't want to go, and so with
Yeah.
those I had a bit more of um, this kind of
Right,
relation
right.
with,
Mhm.
and and so yeah, they got the proton pack and the threats. Uh, yeah,
Yeah, sometimes I mean, sometimes you just gotta be a little strict, you know?
yeah. I definitely the double Scorpio came out in me when it came to fight or flight. It was mainly fight.
It was mainly fu
That it
I
was
understand that urge very well.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so that was cool, and I mean, besides ghosts, it was I'd say like accidental experiences in meditation, and like for instance, I very early, like even as early as 7, we were talking about astrology, Virgo moon. I had an extremely busy mind. Like
Right,
like I had to give myself to sleep. I would often have to like just think myself to sleep, and
right.
and right and but there were other times when something else happened, and I would start breathing in a certain way, hold it, breathe. I was doing sort of pranayama practices without knowing it, and I would start to feel this delightful sort of blissful energy, rising from the base of my spine up through my torso with the breathing practice. And when it would go out my head, I would basically go with it too. And that was that when I was able to fall asleep that way, those that was the best sleep. And sometimes, usually I would lose consciousness and black out right as I left my head. But sometimes I wouldn't, and I would experience myself as if flying out through the back wall of my bedroom and going up over the big maple tree in my backyard, and going going somewhere. And usually I'd get 100, maybe 100 feet or something over my town, and then I would black out. But other times I would go to this place that was like in a distant mountain range. It was like a plateau, and I wasn't cold at all, even though there were high snowy mountains. I was just fine, and there would be a bunch of other people there. And sometimes I'd go to this one above my lake, that I grew up in, I call it the floating city above the lake. And
Yeah,
so yeah, I don't know, that those went on. I figured those were just dreams, really cool dreams, until one of my mentors. We were in conversation one time. This was later at like age 16,
yeah.
and he basically said, "Great, great. You gave a great talk on the ship last night." And I was like, what are you talking about, ship? And what are you talking about, talk? And he said, the one on botany. I didn't understand any of it, but it was great. And I was like, yeah, but what do you mean by ship? Above the lake. And I said, oh, you mean the floating city? You're calling that a ship? And I'd never
Wow.
told him or anybody about
Right, right,
these
right.
before, because
Yeah.
I just thought they were fun dreams and not really the stuff of conversation.
Well,
Yeah.
those sound like out of body
Yeah.
experiences.
Yes.
That's what it sounds like to me, having had some of those myself. Um, yeah, and like it almost seems to me as if like those out of body experiences were a preparation for that big out of body experience that you had when you had the NDE.
Yes.
So if you I know you've talked so much about it, but if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit about that period of your life when you had the NDE, because
Mm.
what I found interesting I've only heard one other podcast that you were on because I wanted as much of a blank slate as possible. But what I found interesting when you were talking about your whole story was the way that you followed your intuition and the way that you kind of flowed with what was happening. Granted, you were very young, so it was like less resistance,
Yeah.
but I would really like to touch on that period where you went from you were already comfortable out of body, and then before you sort of had the big experience, you had your life review. So if you could just talk a little bit about that time.
Oh, God, sure. I mean, it felt like a setup. I mean, I didn't know it at the time, of course. The day before, actually, June 5th, 1997, was usually a very happy day because it was like the first baseball game of the season. That was something I looked forward to because I was a bit of a, well, not a bit of a nerd, definitely a nerd. And so I felt like socially, I wasn't that, popular in the grand scheme of things, but I was great at baseball. And so, as a pitcher. And so like, that gave me some standing. And so then, my big sadness was I broke my arm getting hit by a pitch.
Oh.
The evening of June 5th, we went into a doctor, and they took an X-ray right away and found that I had a broken arm. So I had it in a sling, and then they, was going to, go get a cast on the next day, June 6th, and so June 6th was, well, I should say the evening of June 5th. I was talking with my mom. I'd never had any worries about her health. I worried about my dad's, never about hers. And then so it was strange when I just had, like the powerful words flowing out of me. Are you going to die soon? So that actually, kind of, we were both taken aback by that and surprised. And she's a pretty formidable person with a very, strong mind. So it was interesting for me as the 13-year-old to see, whoa, this got her a little too. And then she was, kind of recovered quickly. And she's like, well, not for a while. I promise I'll be around for as long as you need me. I was like, okay, yeah, I don't know where that came from. Went to bed, and then I woke up, kind of like, I'm going to use a really awful movie reference for your viewing public here. I woke up like Chris Farley falling back into his body in Beverly Hills Ninja the next morning, which is to say, it felt as if I was moving very quickly from somewhere, in my body, and my body
Oh, yeah.
rose up out of like some kind of sleep state, bolt upright. I'm shouting words to my mom and dad before I really should know that they're there, you know, standing right outside my door. And I didn't know I'm not thinking about what I'm going to say, but I find myself shouting, there's something I have to tell you. Like it's just like I'd run with a message from somewhere and was in a hurry. And then I was like, but like I got so upset because I couldn't remember what the hell the message was. And
Do
so
you
they
think
had
it
to.
was a precognition that
Yeah,
you had
absolutely.
about what was happening?
I think I was trying to say like, I don't know, enjoy this walk, or don't do this. Let's change our plans. Let's so I get to, we get to have a family, nuclear family for longer. Nobody has to die. I don't know what it was that I was. I have no idea. It's like the message clean out of the pocket. So they had to come in and calm me down, for a few minutes, and I was just so anxious, and I've got my bearings. It's like, okay, yeah, of course. What do it's, just one of these things, settle down. So I went to the second to the last day of school, which was always fun. Go home, go to school, get some nerd awards, to go put my award box, and um, yeah, we dropped my sister off at her new summer job, her new workplace, and you just, bad timing, all around, driving out of the parking lot and going across one of those divided highways where two lanes are going each way with a big median in the middle, and a car that hit us was just happened to be hidden behind another car that would never have hit us, and it seemed that they started accelerating crazy, just at the wrong time. Uh, and so yeah, I was just turning my head, and that there was a big Lincoln about to hit us, like right there, and I had been quite afraid of death, as like I think many are, as a developing ego, 6 to 13. That was a big thing that seemed like, oh my god, that's got to be horrible, right? The loss of control, and so I was surprised to find myself not bracing for it at all, when because I looked and was like, oh, this jig is up. I mean, it's just like, well, this is over. But it was not a stressed thought, and then it's just complete acceptance right away, and my body started relaxing. I mean, I did think, oh shit, but it was like almost a half-hearted oh shit. It's like, oh, and then I was thinking to myself, I thought this one was going to go more than 13 years, which was a bizarre thought to have too, because it was
That's
coming
a
from
that's
this.
I remember hearing you say that. I'm like, that's a really that was a really weird thought to have right before you die. Like, I thought this one,
Yeah, this one.
like
Yeah, exactly. It was
the
specifically that. Yeah.
the sort of space that you had.
Yeah.
It just like it brought something up in me where I was like, okay, so which part of you was like, I thought this one?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, we could call that part a lot of different things. I was being pulled back into the deep witness. I was being pulled back into maybe we'll call it the higher self, or the oversoul, or again, there's a lot of different words that may be more or less accurate for depending on how technical we want to get with that. But
Yeah.
it was definitely a strange separation, and even the words struck my still teenager brain like, oh, that's an interesting way to put it. Okay. And then right after that, there came a life review, like just, which is interesting because it was a thing a phenomenon I certainly knew about, had heard about, but I was completely skeptical of that such a thing as people reporting. I'm just thinking, oh, they're kind of embellishing, probably. It's exaggerating. How could you have that much content kind of compressed into that amount of time? And good lord, it felt like hours,
Yeah.
not in a tiring way, but hours in a millisecond, or in a few split seconds. And that was interesting because again, there was this sort of sense of being connected to this a vast consciousness that was far bigger than the life that I'd led. Whether I want to call it my higher self, or God, or whatever, again, I'm not really married to any of those concepts, but it was a flavor of consciousness that I was not unfamiliar with. I just usually, when it would come into my life, I'd kind of be resisting resisting it a little bit, and be like, no, don't tell me what to do. I'm going to do my thing, my plan. Usually, it was often come in with alternative solutions to life's problems. When it would come like that, with a voice and with sort of direction, and it became my guide, kind of like in the Divine Comedy, Virgil. It became my psychopomp. This vast consciousness, and it toured me through my life. One frame at a time, in complete detail, and with in seamless detail. And that was great. And all the places that I'd sort of screwed up, and screw ups were different than what I necessarily was thinking was a screw up, of course, at the time. But places where I was in fear, or where I lied, or where there was some kind of mask of pretense that I put up to try to get through life, like those things were seen for what they were, and kind of forgiven. Where I trespassed on others were seen. And yeah, and so as that went on, it just basically felt like having a really heavy suit taken off of me that I had no idea I was wearing. And that was I noted that during that process. I mean, I had sort of meta questions that were kind of there, like, fascinating how much fear can be accumulated in such a short time with such
Yeah.
an easy life.
13 years.
Yeah, like that, really like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was, and that ran its course. By the end of that, I wouldn't say I had an out of body experience there. I'd say I had an all body experience. And in fact, I think I was more in my body than I'd ever been in a long time, so probably since earlier childhood, because I had not liked other people all that much. And so I was, kind of pulled out. But here I was just completely like, my God, this, if I had religious language, I might have said, my God, this is the kingdom of heaven, or my God, this is the Pure Land. Like it's been here the whole time, like Wizard of Oz. It's just like, okay, that was the big thing, was every little particle, everything in my field of vision, as my eyes were still open, the sky in the distance, the clouds in the air, the car and the dude driving it about to hit us, everything was actually felt as, basically love, you know and not, I'll qualify, say, like, not in some kind of like airy fairy or kind of like come and go emotional sense. It was like love, all caps, love as the, primordial substance of all existence. And I also realized in that moment that, basically my whole life, in even the shitty things, funnily enough, had all been basically love or God or whatever, interacting with itself, using itself to interact with itself. And it was just, oh. And then, so sitting there for, probably split seconds again. And then, there's, we have impact. I remember the last physical memory I had at that point was my head on the right side being thrown into the glass of the car door. The glass didn't break and I had no bruise on my head, which was strange. No cuts. I was definitely concussed, but I had the only extra injury I picked up in the accident was on the arm that I just broken the day before. And basically, I broke my middle finger. So I had to go around with a cast like this, literally like this, for for like a month or two. My finger was unbroken, and that was, I mean, I mean, even in that, even this great tragedy, I mean, lose the most important people in my life, so a wonderful mother, just broken apart by this. And at the same time, something deep in me couldn't help but also see the comedy in that it seemed intentional,
Yeah.
and so that was in the mix as well. Like, Jesus, see, it's like there was this deep sense that it was all kind of scripted. Like, who was doing the writing? I don't know. God, the universe, what I could have lots of different names for it. And so some of those things took a bit of the, and having the precognition of it took some of the harder edges of it. But the thing that really took the hard edge off of all that was Samadhi. I mean, I didn't have a word for whatever the hell I was experiencing. I thought I was in shock for a while. Basically for like 2.5, 3 months, I was having a kind of a parallel life, not in a confusing way, but sort of like I could still behave as a 13-year-old without really acting or trying. And it was almost like there was momentum to, let this thing go out. But it was like I was sitting in some deep quietude, at the same time. And I wasn't afraid of anything. And that was something I really noticed, because I realized at that point how much fear, again, how much fear had been in my life. Like that, I mean, that I was just completely blind to, just so used to it. And I was like, oh my God, this is what it's like to not be afraid. It's like I could feel into my stomach and down into my legs, and there's this delightful open. It was like being a baby again, in a lot of ways, just raw, immediate, intense, no filters on the inside. Easy to be truthful when I would try to. When I would try to lie in the early days, I got the ability back, unfortunately. But when I try to lie, I would start laughing and be like, "Why would you do that?" That's And then there was this big sense of like, in my head, the mind was quiet, even though I was also going through pain, the pain of grief, and
Yeah.
but those thoughts would just move through. Like, for some reason, I wasn't ruminating on them, and I was quite a ruminator. before, and so those were moved through like water of a waterfall, and yet I was in this cave that was dry and comfortable in some ways, and had no back to it, and so there's this experience of some sort of big vast field that this body felt like just a tiny little emanation of this endlessly vast field. And that was great. And I started experimenting with that field. I think, okay, I can actually take my attention and put it in the field. When I do that, when I direct attention that way, there's this just joy and bliss flow through the body. And so I would experiment with that, and it was very interesting for me. And so I thought that was all shock. And I was like, oh my God, why didn't I get in shock sometime sooner? This is the best state of life. That's what I was thinking, right? So yeah. And so that was, it's like 2.5 months. By the time I got to eighth grade, it was like someone flipped a switch, maybe me in some way.
Yeah.
So I remember, I mean, not a lot of people necessarily noticed that there was anything much different about me, which was fine by me because I wasn't actually, looking for those sorts of conversations.
Sure.
But I remember one person did, and I remember them asking. It was on the playground, actually more on the sports field side. I was walking to the lake one day, and they're like, what? Yeah, what's happened? I said, like, I don't know, but if you want this, you might just have to go get yourself in a car accident and almost die. And then we both laughed at that because it's
Yeah.
like such dodgy advice, right? It's like
Right.
that's how you do it.
That's how you do it. You almost
You
die.
just don't. You gotta. I was like, hey, maybe we could just like go jump off some heights together,
Right.
and
Right. But you know what I was curious about because of the phenomenon that you described before the accident. I was
Mm.
curious when your mother died, did you have interactions with her after she passed away?
Oh God, I wanted to, and I didn't. Not that I know of. I mean, I didn't. I wanted. I remember one night I stayed up in Vigil. I mean, it was more than one night. It was multiple nights, and I'd be like, because this was after the bliss had passed. Actually, that was
Mm,
a different,
okay.
and I'd forgotten this, but apparently, right after we got home from the hospital, day of, and then they jogged my memory, and I'm grateful that people can do that for me. I was in my bed, and friends of the family were basically like, You remember telling us that your mom was in the room?" It's like, I do not remember that. And now I have a hazy memory of that now. And so that might have, but I was in a different, I was in
There's a
sort of,
lot going on.
yeah, that was full like bucket of, 50-pound bucket of grief in the auric field period at that point. But, later, I did not. Yeah, it took years.
It took years, but you
It
did
took,
eventually?
yeah, eventually, what was it? 2000 so 6 years. And 6 years, and I'm basically 19, 20, and I'm in my meditation teacher training, and that was a beautiful moment because I was maybe, I don't know, 3 months into a 6-month program of meditating like 12 hours a day, and I remember going to the bathroom, washing my hands. I look up at the mirror, and then instead of just seeing my face there, which I did see, I also saw my mother's face. And it wasn't in a creepy, scary way. Because I always told the ghost, if you pull that shit on me, if you do the mirror thing, I'm coming at you in my astral body. Scorched earth. There's guidelines here, but no. It was in her face was in my face, but not even in the biological resemblance. It was like a strange superimposition. I felt her presence and felt her warmth, and whether that was, I don't know, real or objectively real or not, I always didn't care that much because subjectively, along with that, was this quite a cathartic release when that happened. It was quite a sense of some weight related to her and related to what I need to be doing with my life, or a bunch of other stuff was just removed.
Wow.
And because I got a sense, it's like she told me, this is you. I'm basically told me, I'm proud of you. This is absolutely what you're supposed to be doing. This is why we had all this stuff happen. This is why I died, because we needed to get you. You needed to pursue waking up, and you never would have done that so quickly if I was around, because life would have been too happy. You just would, and I kind of knew that. I knew I would have ended. I would have been a happy, I don't know, on my way to being a professor, or maybe a lawyer. Wonderful, ways to use a lifetime, but I don't think it was the one that was trying to happen here,
Right.
in the end. So yeah, that took years. But I mean, I remember I went to sort of a meet your spirit guide workshop when I was 15,
Mm-hmm.
and thinking, well, maybe I'll meet my mom though, too. I
Oh,
mean, I was interested in the spirit guides, but I thought, like, yeah, that'd be great. Maybe they'll redirect me to my mom, because I've been having trouble on my own. I get all these tossers from the cemetery coming
I
by, but
know it's
uh,
frustrating when that happens, right? You're like,
yeah,
I can't choose. It's like the ones that you're the ones that you're looking for may not be the ones that come calling, and that's kind of one of the struggles of being like a psychically open person with like mediumship stuff going on, where it's like you have say, but you don't have control over who gets to come in.
yeah,
Yeah, but it
yeah,
must have been frustrating as a kid, because you were like, all my life I've been dealing with ghosts, and now when I need the ghosts to show up.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
also
yeah.
it also sounds to me like you needed that space to not have that interaction, because that was another way of propelling you forward.
Yes, yes. I mean, that actually happened in that very same spirit guide class. Like, I did what they told me to do, whatever exercise it was. I don't remember. I'm not quite sure it was the exercise that was effective, but I found myself shooting up the top of my head up a tube, like really fast. And then I kept going up this tube, and I basically experienced my head popping up through a floor. And I was in this room with like, it almost looked like how they did the Philip K. Dick's Adjustment Bureau film, with the angels wearing the hats, and being in sort of mid-century clothing, like people with like my life in charts up on a board, and they were talking about me, and I was looking at them, and then they turned their head to me and said, like, "Oh, great job, kid. But no, you don't need us. Just go back down." And then they kind of gently pushed my head back down, and I found myself back in my body, and I was frustrated. I was like, I made it to the spirit guides, and they're not going to tell me anything, because it basically said, "You've got what you need." I'm
Well,
also
they did
grateful.
guide you, not
They
just in the
did.
way you wanted them to.
They did. And
Yeah.
actually, around the same time, I thought I was experiencing some kind of magnitude of haunting or something that was just freaking me out. It turns out it really wasn't. But anyways, I asked one of the local psychics, a very good friend of mine, if she could in some way help sort of desensitize me, so that I could, like, live as a normal teenager and do my
I
thing.
feel that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know, whatever she did have me do. Basically, I had to do some prayers, and kind of a ritual. It worked, and so that I was basically able to spend 15 to, oh God, it must have been like 19,
Yeah.
18.
Yeah.
I was basically able to spend those years with some peace, and just be able to, in some ways, be kind of a normal teenager, and have relationships and hang with friends without this little extra thing on the side that, kind of, coming in.
That extra thing on the side sometimes can be very disruptive. So
Yeah.
it's quite a thing at times, and I remember for me this happened in my 20s, where I asked for the phenomenon to stop for a while because it was getting very overwhelming.
Mm.
And I also prayed, but I was just like, God, I just can't anymore. This was also in a period where I was very severely depressed. So I think
Ah.
that exacerbated the activity,
Yeah.
and because like my psyche was under so much pressure, it was just like opening up the other dimensions more and more, not that they weren't open before. It was just like really the out of body stuff was freaking me out. And I was like, I can barely handle being in my body right now. But so I can relate because I asked for it to stop. I prayed and I was like, I'm not going to do this now because I need to feel okay first,
Yes.
and it did stop. And that's the measure of control that I think that we have
Yeah.
in terms of the access of the psychic realms or the input from all the God knows what.
Mm. Mm.
I mean, at least that's my experience of it. So it's interesting that you're saying that you have a parallel experience where,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and actually, I had depression at the time as well, which which I didn't have that much experience with at that time, but there it was hitting me like an anvil, and so yeah, the combination of at the time depression, teenage hormones, and psychical stuff
it's a lot.
was all a bit it's all a bit too much.
It's too
So
much. It's like your nervous system goes on in overload, and you're like, I can't do it.
yeah, so it's like some of the ones the spirits I was familiar with, like there were a few nicer ones that I sort of had. I basically gave them work, at least in my mind. That's what I was doing. I don't know what they were really doing, but it was, gave them work to do in my room. I could still kind of feel them, but it was
Hmm.
it was so dampened, and
Hmm.
so I had from that time I had no problem like falling into delightful sleeps.
Oh.
I didn't have like just this peripheral sense of something until I decided to become a serious meditator.
Okay.
And as soon as I made that decision, which was a decision that was a long time in coming, took me 3 years really. But once I made that decision and was going ahead with that, I had a really interesting thing happen. 3 mornings in a row, I woke up with a sleep paralysis in the morning when the sun's coming in. And the first morning, a lady who was very familiar to a ghost lady, very familiar to me in childhood, who looked like sort of dressed in Edwardian high collar clothing. She always had a look on her face as if like, oh my God, that's like resting scary ghost face. I mean, not scary, but just like, kind of stern. You don't want
Yeah.
stern Edwardians in your room.
Serious.
And serious. And then but I could tell she was good. I could tell that was just, I don't know. And she walked, and they did it in a very creepy way, I have to say, which kind of pissed me off, but they walked right behind my head. And I was like,
Okay.
why'd you do? And I got pissed off at them. So I was like, I tried to turn my head through the paralysis to show them, that I'm not backing down. And I would fall asleep. I fell asleep, and then this other fellow came in who looked like he was from the 50s or the 70s, due to his ugly sweater and the colors that were popular in both of those decades. And I was able to sort of keep eye contact with him for longer before falling asleep, and enough that from his eyes, he basically sent me a message on behalf of the other one too. He said like, thank you, we love you. It was good to be here with you. We're going now,
Oh,
and
wow.
that was cool. And then the third morning, this being showed up that when I was 8, I had, or 8 or 9 or something like that. I had first met, and when I was 8, he came into the room and was all dark, like a Dementor in Harry Potter. And then he basically said, "I come in peace." I was told by the others that you could help us. And I said, okay. And I basically gave him a job. I had him be the bouncer by my door. So his job was to make sure that only souls that wanted to transition could come in,
Uh-huh.
like
Hmm.
serious ones. I said, it doesn't matter if they're kind of scary and ugly. They have just if they're sincere. That's the can you do that? He said, absolutely. So basically, and then I just sort of think, okay, I guess there might be a guy standing there. Who knows? I kind of put it out of my mind. Figured that's just imagination, just me and nervy kid dealing with stuff. And then the third morning, after these first two, I see him in broad daylight because again, I'm waking up when the sun's streaming in. He's standing by my door, and instead of being just one sort of thick black gray mass, half of him is black gray with no features. The other half it now has a human face and color. and basically he said he's going to go now too. And he said, since you decided to turn your room into an ashram, you have a very different sort of protection, and you don't need us at all anymore. So we're going. He said he's going to go, be a human being. So there's a wild story for for the viewers of this podcast. You can take with a few grains of salt as you need to.
Ishtar and I keep talking about these fascinating topics of near death experiences, awakening, and psychic phenomenon. Stay tuned for part 2 of Life is Healing with Lubaina and Ishtar.